All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome, Joe Tillman. For those who don't know, Joe Tillman is a hair loss and surgical hair restoration specialist and expert with over 23 years of experience in the field. He started out as a repair patient after having two unsuccessful hair transplants in the early 1990s that you had to get repaired through additional surgeries, and 9 years later, in early 2003, he did so. Since that time, he began working with the clinic that repaired him, Hassan and Wong in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And after 11 years, went on to found the hairtransplantmentor.com, where he highlights world-leading experts in surgical hair restoration after putting them through extensive and a difficult review process. He's also the co-host of Spencer Coburn's The Bald Truth on YouTube, and he operates a successful YouTube channel of his own called the Hair Transplant Channel, where he has a series of videos designed to educate and empower hair loss sufferers worldwide. Joe Tillman, I know we've worked together a few years back. It's been a while.
Yeah.
You look great. Your hair looks
Thank you.
great. And
Thank
I
you.
have so many questions for you, so I'm going to make the most of your time.
Absolutely. And great to see you again, Mikey. It's really good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's jump right into it. So, there are tons of guys out there. We're growing up and we start noticing a little bit of thinning, hairline receding.
Mm-hmm.
And my first question to you is, why is it such a taboo subject? Why do guys not openly talk about it? And and how do we combat that?
It's funny you asked that because this question I've pondered many times over the course of my career, and it actually re-entered my thought process just a couple of days ago. So it's actually good timing. And it was only because someone was asking a question that triggered that question in myself. And it's quite simple. I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it. It's actually quite complicated, but there are two aspects to it. And I guess the larger aspect of this is instinct and primal recognition of alpha, beta, things like this as we have evolved as a species. And there are different aspects of humanity and our physical makeup that indicate subconsciously to others around us our virility, our status, our position. And when you look at it, fairly modern history over the past couple thousand years, that's documented in ancient Rome. They had the wreath that had various representations, but one of those was like on Caesar, was to hide his hair loss, or so it was rumored. And I don't know how much accuracy there is to that, but I have read that multiple times. But throughout history, we've had this issue where actually if you look at ancient Egypt, they had formulas, they had recipes to fight hair loss that included beeswax and all these very basic ingredients that they mix together and slap on your head. It's been a concern for as long as history is documented in some form. And when we look at it today, and forgive the mishmash on that, I wasn't expecting to go there, so I didn't have that prepared.
No, I threw you a curveball.
Yeah, but I mean,
and you're still today on Instagram telling people that the beeswax doesn't work.
Yeah, pretty much that and the rosemary oil, right? But Jesus, the rosemary oil. But the modern reasons why is simple, and that's social media. It's always in the social eye as far as if someone's losing their hair. In fact, I remember I really started to focus on this as an issue, or a question, I should say, when I had already had a couple of bad hair transplants, as you mentioned in the intro at the top of the show. And so, of course, I was even more conscious about it. Like before I had my surgeries, I was not really that concerned about my hair loss. I was actually talked into it by my surgeon. I wasn't there for myself. I was there for a friend, giving him some support while he was going through his consultations. That's a different discussion that we can talk about later. But after I had my 2 hair transplants, I was hyper aware of hair loss in general, and I would see it in the movies. And I'll never forget the very first moment in my adult life that it really hit me what was going on was when I was watching The Cable Guy with Jim Carrey and Matthew Broderick. And there was a scene in that movie where Matthew Broderick is making fun of his boss to his girlfriend, talking about his plugs and how terrible they looked, because that was one of the kind of unspoken jokes in the movie. And that's when I really started to think about the social aspect of hair loss. And that was, when did that movie come out? Like 1995 or something like that, 96. And I was already a few years into my experience with bad hair restoration. And the issue of hair loss and how it affects men has been an issue through modern marketing schemes. You know,
Right.
the bald guy, the skinny bald guy is the one that doesn't get the girls, and the big buff guy with a full head of hair gets the girls. And that's, you know, and that's what we see in marketing and, you know, movies and, you know, advertisements and just everywhere. That's the way it always works out. And social media has only compounded that issue. The, you know, laser focus on unattainable beauty standards for now men, just like it's been for women. And it's really been a problem that's compounded over the past 15, 20 years because of social media.
Yeah, and there's still a whole lot of mysteries revolving around even the process of hair loss and why certain follicles are susceptible to DHT while others aren't. And from an evolutionary perspective, it's still a mystery. And even all these treatments that come out that are FDA approved, like finasteride and minoxidil, they weren't designed for hair loss, which is crazy because this is a $3 billion+ industry. And we're always
Right.
like, hey, a symptoms is hair's coming back. So we were treating people with hypertension with minoxidil, and we're like, hey, hair's growing. We're treating people for BPH with finasteride, and we're like, hey, hair is growing. And you
Exactly.
know, the underlying mechanisms that cause it, I find it quite interesting because I always wonder what's the evolutionary advantage for this. And I've thought about it, and I'm just going to throw a thought here, but you
Okay.
know, we tend to see it as a bad thing, but it also signaled sexual maturity to people. It also maybe signaled to a mate that someone is more reliable to be with
Mm-hmm.
because they're reaching a certain peak. And those are possibly some of those like backhanded advantages, which I found interesting.
Yeah,
But
I can see that.
yeah, now moving on to the day-to-day stuff. So you've been in the industry for a long time. I know you have from the early days, and I want to ask you a question because I'm personally seeing a bit of a kind of a commercialized Cambrian explosion of competition in this past few years. But I mean,
That's a great analogy, a Cambrian explosion. I like that.
yeah,
Yeah, that's good.
yeah, it's been stagnant for a very long time, and now you're seeing kind of a little bit of innovation. And do you feel that way? And where do you think things are heading in terms of the industry?
It's actually, I was speaking with a doctor friend of mine in South Africa, of all places, and he was asking me the same question because he's been this guy that always keeps his head down. He just does the basic work and doesn't really go to meetings or conferences to see what's new. And I'll tell you what I told him. There's nothing really that's changed over the past 15 years. It looks like it has, as
Well,
far
they're
as
getting more creative with what we do know. So, and I know
well,
that we've like had topical finasteride, which we're going to talk about all the treatments in just a moment. You know, we
yeah,
probably
yeah,
should have
yeah.
talked about that earlier, but um, yeah, I mean, there's always like something 5 years ahead. But I do feel like in terms of what we do have, we're getting a little more creative with it lately. And is that just me or?
Well, what do you mean with what we do have, like the surgeries or the treatments?
Well, both. But with the treatments, I mean, it's been just fairly simple. It's been minoxidil from Johnson and Johnson, and it's
Okay,
been
well,
finasteride from
let's
Merck.
let's run with that. So with treatments, as far as FDA approved treatments, nothing has changed in 30
Correct.
years.
Yes.
You only have two, and that is minoxidil in 1986, I think, and this is just off the top of my head, not prepared. 1986, and then 10 years later we had Propecia, for hair loss in 1996. And it was Proscar before that as a larger tablet, 5 milligrams. A couple years prior, it was approved for benign prostate hyperplasia, enlarged prostate. And then Propecia is 1 milligram. So there you go. After that, nothing else has been approved for hair loss specifically. But then we had dutasteride, which came out a few years, early 2000s, I think 2003 or 2. I think 2002. Don't quote me on that. And that is also not FDA approved, but it was almost immediately jumped on by some in the medical community because it has a very similar action as finasteride. So you look at the two descriptions. Finasteride, fin being
One inhibitor.
one, and it blocks one of the two
Alpha
enzymes
reductase.
that convert testosterone to dihydrotestosterone, and then dutasteride, du being 2, it blocks both, and so it does block more DHT, but we're not sure overall if that's actually a good thing. For that's such a rabbit hole to go down. But then since then, I will note for those watching this that are sticklers about this kind of thing, dutasteride was approved in Japan for hair loss. So
really?
there is that. But since then, there's nothing. In fact, what you have is you do have, I'll use your term, a Cambrian explosion of treatments, but they are bypassing the FDA.
Correct.
And bypassing the requirements of such acknowledgement by the FDA or approval, with all of the financial investment that's required, and it is very expensive to get FDA approval. And they're going with the nutraceutical route, which is almost like a designer treatment that does not require such examination. And so then we get, I don't have it with me, but you get different treatments. Like I can't think of the name. There's one that came out of Korea. They started to market in Europe, and you could actually buy it on Amazon because it's not considered to be a pharmaceutical. It's a nutraceutical. So it's like a vitamin almost, but it's a topical application. And there are other treatments that are coming out like that. And then you have, you do have pharmaceutical companies working on legitimate solutions like pyrolutamide by Kentor Pharmaceutical. They're probably in the lead as far as all the treatments out there. I haven't looked at this in a while, but that's the sense I get.
Or hair multiplication?
No, that is just a topical solution as far as I know. I think it's topical. Yeah, actually, I'm pretty sure it's topical. And
is it dealing with inflammation in the scalp, or is it dealing with DHT?
I believe it's an androgen. It arrests the receptors that pull in all the information to kill the hair, right? So it blocks the receptors in the scalp tissue instead of blocking the formation of DHT. It is a different approach, and forgive me.
The DHT can't even bind to the androgen receptors. Just
exactly. It doesn't allow that to happen. Like the DHT is there. It's just the receptors that can bind with it don't, because of this. It gets in the way of it. So it's a different step in the process where the process is blocked. And again, this is we're doing this last minute, so I wasn't prepared for this, but that is one of the leading ones out there, and I'm sure that they hope to get FDA approval, and there are several others out there. But the point being is that there are a lot more treatments being pursued now by pharmaceutical companies worldwide. Several out of Korea, out of Japan, China is really getting into it. Kentor Pharmaceuticals is based in China. They have a office in China, or main office in China and the United States, and that's where two separate concurrent studies are going on right now. I think it's phase 2, and there are several others. So as far as the treatments go, pharmaceutical wise, the future is looking bright, but nothing is really hinted at being any better than what we've got now. But the main benefit is less side effects. and that's about it. Yeah.
So when I actually said Cambrian explosion, I was referring to more of the marketing and the consumer
Okay.
aspect of it,
Yep.
where it's kind of been trickled down into mainstream society with products like Hims and Hers, and they're getting creative where some people don't respond well to taking oral finasteride and they're doing topical and vice versa. And you're kind of
Yeah.
seeing kind of like a resurgency of people taking oral minoxidil, oral minoxidil, putting minoxidil inside their mouth. Um, so yeah, and let's actually take a tiny step back here because I think we kind of did a deep dive first. Let's quickly talk about how hair loss kind of happens, and then let's talk about, as someone who lives in the United States, what kind of treatments are available today that actually work. So yeah, I mean, getting into how it all starts. I mean, break it down, but from what I believe is you have the main one, which is DHT, and then you have some recent studies that show there's a protein in, so they kind of checked the heads of people without hair, and they found that there's a protein called PGD2, which
Mm-hmm.
causes a little more inflammation in the scalp, and that's prevalent
Yeah.
in people with hair loss. So the assumption is inhibiting that will cause a reversal, and that's why we see maybe some anti-inflammatory medications do have some benefits for hair loss. So I know we don't have really many treatments in the PGD2 or the inflammation route. The main
Mm-hmm.
thing we do today is we kind of realize we have this hormone called DHT, which you have testosterone in our blood, free flow testosterone, and it hits one of those three enzymes: your alpha A reductase, your alpha B reductase, or aromatase.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. Well, with
Um,
the
well,
reductase, it's there's type 1 and type 2
type two.
reductase. Yeah, the two
Yes,
enzymes there. And
correct.
just to address a very common misconception about DHT, um, people usually, when I see this on social media, they talk about DHT attacking your hair follicles, and that's why you have hair loss. But it's actually not that simplistic. It's the certain hair follicles have cellular receptors that are sensitive to DHT. So it's kind of the flip side of that. So genetically speaking, all this is written in your genetic code before you're even born, and those receptors of those specific follicles will be sensitive to DHT at some point after puberty and maturation in late teens, early 20s, and onward, as we developed as men. Some
Right.
women also have a DHT sensitivity as well. That's a completely different subject, but that's essentially how it happens. And then the two DHT blockers that we were talking about before, finasteride and dutasteride, they prevent the transformation of testosterone into dihydrotestosterone, and it doesn't get rid of it. It just reduces the amount so that there is less of that, um, uh, less sensitive, not less sensitivity, but
Less of
less
that DHT to
DHT
bind to those
exposed
androgens.
to those sensitive
Correct.
receptors, and less hair loss long term. And in many cases, it affects the issue so much to where those hairs that are still growing but haven't fallen out can actually reverse the process, and they get thicker and look. It looks like you have more hair growth, but that's the key thing here. It won't regrow hair that's already disappeared. If it's fine and
Isn't there
vellus.
some time frame where your hair has gone vellus and it's still there, and that's why people who take new treatments do see some regrowth in some cases, but they're not
Mhm.
seeing a substantial. It's very rare to see a substantial amount of regrowth.
Yeah, there's really no rhyme or reason to it as far as being able to look at someone and be able to predict what's going to happen. I mean, you can get a gut feeling based on experience, but what I've found is, and most doctors will agree with me on this, is once you cannot visibly see the hair anymore, and it's been 6 months where there is no visible hair, then it's gone. But the challenge with that is understanding what's visible and what's not, because you have to define
Right.
that. And a lot of people will say, "Oh, I don't see any hair," but if they actually look closer, there is a very fine peach fuzz of hair, and that in and of itself is hope, because it can be turned around. When you look at someone that's bald, if they're not formica bald, like it looks like a marble top with shine, then there's hope. And it's not going to be it's not going to be usually it's not enough to where they can grow back enough to style, and get a cut, but it can be enough to change their aesthetic for the better. So
Right. And also
especially
synergistically used with hair transplantation can help give a predictable landscape. So you get on the
100%.
treatments, you kind of know what you're working with, and then you can add hair transplantation to it. I just want to take.
Yeah,
Sorry, just one step.
just to touch on that. I mean, one benefit of that is, I have people telling me, well, I want to get a hair transplant, but I don't want to have to take the medication. If you have that shine on your scalp, and you take the medication, and you get some sort of peach fuzz return, and you get some color to it, that can actually improve the appearance of a low density transplant because less shine will be coming through those transplanted hairs as they grow through,
Makes sense.
giving that illusion of stronger density where it's not strong at all. So it's lots of tricks can be played with light, and that's what it comes down to.
Right. I want to pull this back just one more second. So we're talking about finasteride in the beginning. So we, just to get back to the DHT part. So you have the testosterone, and it either gets converted to estrogen by the third receptor, or it gets converted to DHT by the first two. And I want to talk about this because I want to talk about why finasteride is different than dutasteride, and then why minoxidil is different entirely. So, once that testosterone gets picked up by your blood, it can get picked up by the first enzyme. And what we've noticed in studies, and you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Sorry, you're cutting up pretty bad. When you're saying alpha reductase A and B, you're meaning type 1 and type 2.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Making sure. All right.
Yeah. So type 1, so alpha A reductase converts to DHT. We block that, nothing happens. Type 2, we block that. We notice, hey, hair quality is improved. And essentially that's what finasteride is. You're blocking type B, right?
Yeah. You're well, when you're, okay. So when you do block, when you block type 1 or type A, as you say, there is a reduction of DHT, but finasteride does only work on type 2 or type B.
Correct.
Yeah, and that in studies was showing that it reduces DHT levels roughly 60, maybe a little bit more than 60%.
With 1 milligram.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Yes. And then for whatever reason, when you block both, which is what dutasteride does, you see a significant increase. And when I say for whatever reason is because in the studies when they blocked just type A, they noticed no change in hair loss, even though there was a reduction in DHT. That's actually a study that I read. So for whatever reason, the phenomenon is if you block both, you see a substantial increase. So that is essentially...
Well, let me follow up with a question on that. How do they reduce just type A or type 1?
So they use a certain drug. I'm not sure which one it was.
Okay. Because I'm not familiar with the study, and I didn't know that where they were able to reduce just type 1 and nothing happened. So it's interesting that you say that.
Well, they reduced type 1. Well, they reduced DHT, but nothing happened correct in terms of hair quality.
Yeah.
Now with dutasteride, they block both. So that's essentially why finasteride is so amazing, because it blocks it at a hormonal level, right?
Yeah.
And then you have minoxidil, which... and correct me if I'm wrong on this as well, we're not entirely sure why it works, but we know that it increases the blood flow to the scalp.
Correct.
It increases the potassium and nutrient flow to the scalp. And perhaps since it increases the blood pressure in the scalp, it makes it harder for those DHT molecules to bind to those androgen receptors. And that's, it's all speculation, but that's roughly why we believe it works. And it's a drug called minoxidil or Rogaine from Johnson & Johnson. So we were talking earlier.
That's what's weird is it is speculation. We don't know why it works. The drug is 50 years old, I think. Early 80s, late 70s. I can't remember when it first came on the market, like 81 or so.
Yeah.
And funny side story. I didn't realize it, but my father was taking the oral version of this, Lonitin, as it was first known, for many years. And
it was originally only oral, right? It's only became
exactly. And he's taking it for high blood pressure, and he had hair loss, But it wasn't until his doctor switched it. I found this out after the fact, after he'd actually passed away. My mom was telling me about this, and after he was switched to a different medication, he lost all of his hair, and he went to a full blown 6+, which is where I had gone in my late 20s. And so for many years, Lonington was hanging on to his hair when he was only being treated for blood pressure. So that was a very that was interesting to me discovery after I already gotten into the industry.
It's like if you're not conscious and observing, you never realize that connection. And that's why these things are so hard to gauge, because you are on a downhill slope if you have that genetic susceptibility, and you never really know what slows it up, speeds it up, what doesn't. What you can get these hints, but it's all really hard to gauge, and it's all a tricky place to be. Yeah, and now just to talk about minoxidil for a second. So the one you buy from Rogaine, there's the 2% for low strength, 5% for stronger strength. And now if you can get a pharmaceutical company, if you get a doctor to write you a prescription, you can even get up to, I've seen people get 7% with a little bit of a stronger dosage.
There used to be, I forgot the source, but you could actually buy 15% at one point. Yeah. I want to say, was it Dr. Reddy? I forgot who it was, but years ago, I thought that he had a 15% solution. I could be wrong on that. It's been a long time, but that rings a bell. I think that was actually a thing at one point.
Yeah, but the thing about the topical, which is great, is because you can kind of target and hone in on the specific area that's affected, and people who take the oral, it kind of gives you hair kind of everywhere, right? So it gives you a little more hair around your eyebrows, your skin, your beard, everywhere. So that's just one of the side effects that can be a little. So yeah, I'm happy we discussed this. So now we discussed minoxidil, finasteride, and this is, I think, your area of like really what you focus on is the hair transplantation.
Yeah, the surgical side of stuff. Yeah,
the surgical side of it. So walk us through it. Someone like myself who's in their 30s, what are the do's and the don'ts? What do you look for, and what do you recommend?
The number one don't rush into it. Don't freak out when you first start to notice your hair loss. And early on in someone's experience with hair loss, it can be reversed, in many cases completely reversed, to the point where it looks like no hair has been lost at all. And I'm not talking about the juvenile hairline that we may have had when we were like 16, and then you're 25 and you think that you'll get that back through medication or whatever means. But it was explained to me once by a patient in a very logical and simplistic manner that just makes total sense. And we're talking about the differences between, the wants and needs of a younger hair loss patient versus the wants and needs of an older hair loss patient that has more aggressive hair loss. And it was explained to me saying, using myself as an example, you've been losing your hair for years and you're used to what you look like without hair. I just lost my hair yesterday, relatively speaking. I'm 24 years old, and
interesting.
And just a few years ago, I had no hair loss. So, of course, I want that back. I don't comprehend what it is to have more hair loss than I have now today, and for it to look normal. So, normal for me is 3 years ago.
Right.
And that makes total sense.
Yeah, and it's not just normal for you as 3 years ago. And as every single point before that, it was perfectly fine. There was everything there.
Yeah, it was a non-issue. Like you don't think about it except for styling it before you go out, for a night on the town with the boys, trying to pick up some girls or something. So, yeah, I mean, so the first thing is don't flip out over it. Don't lose your shit over it, because it's easy to do that. And the first thing you do is you go to Reddit or you go to TikTok or you go to, whatever online resource to do your research to find out what's going on. And then and that's where the trouble starts. You get inundated with these influencers that have, 1 million followers saying,
I see so much bullshit on there.
Rosemary is the answer. It's like, fuck,
and they show you these before and after, and there's something so inherently deceitful about it.
Well, it's the nature of the beast, unfortunately. everyone's out to make a buck.
Right.
And even in the surgical side of things, you have patients that had 1 or 2 surgeries, and now they're an expert with their own YouTube channel telling other people what to do for their own surgical needs. And honestly, a lot of times they have no idea what they're talking about. They have maybe the basics because they learned it somewhere else and they combine that with their own experience, but they don't have a deep understanding of even what they went through. And they're out there pushing their opinions or what
And
they
also
call
telling you to go
facts.
to Turkey for a hair transplant, which I would
Well,
love to talk about because I don't stop hearing that.
yeah, and that's a really interesting subject. But back to what I was talking about, what a lot of these people don't realize is that the influencers that they're watching online talking about their own hair transplant journey, and then they talk about the clinic, they don't realize that clinic is actually paying that influencer for everything that they're talking about online. And I know that because I've been approached by these clinics where they've even offered to fly me to their clinic in Turkey and a friend, document the whole thing, and pay me 10,000 euros on top of giving me a free hair transplant, or my friend. And this is happening every day. And I don't want some of your viewers to be thinking, oh, this is what I need to make, I'll make some money myself. Now I have an idea. But that's the problem with a lot of these influencers is they're not disclosing their financial affiliation with these clinics, and they're actually violating FCC rules. But
this is why you and Spencer are so well respected in this industry, is precisely because you don't give in to that pressure, and you try to keep it neutral. You try to give your honest opinion, and we know it's there because it's a very different opinion than where you hear everywhere else.
Yeah, and the problem with that is a lot of people don't want to hear the truth. They do want to have.
They want what's emotionally appealing.
Well, yeah. they want the affirmation of their own fears, and they want the answers as opposed to they want the easy answers as opposed to the hard answers. And just to clarify, full disclosure, I do work with several, I think it's 15, 17 doctors worldwide that do pay me a monthly fee to be a part of what I do. But what I do is not, part of what I do is not recommend them. I don't recommend them specifically. If someone says, hey, who do I go to? I'm like, go to my website. There's some doctors there. I don't get referrals. I don't get referral fees. I don't get commissions. They just pay me to be on my website. That's it. And as you said at the top of the show, it's because of a review process. Like if I'm going to have someone I can say, hey, you can consider these guys, any one of these guys, it's after they've been through a very stringent review process based on my standards and experience. So there is a financial component, but it's separate from what I'm telling people on the show.
It doesn't affect the advice you're giving people, which is what's the most important thing.
And I wanted that to be clear because I don't want someone coming back and saying, oh, well, he's full of shit. He's actually getting paid by doctors. Yes, I am. I have to make a living, but that's the difference in how I do it versus, regular influencers, commissions, referrals, all that horseshit. So
it's a world of a difference. I know exactly what you're saying, but when someone's paid directly by the doctor to review them, that's kind of where it becomes a bit of an issue. So the whole turkey thing, people don't seem to understand why that's such a big problem. I saw someone recently who got a hair transplant from Turkey. He was actually quite happy with it, which I was like, great. But I'm like, that's an anecdotal review there because, people go, oh, it costs so much less. Right. But, this is your face here, right? Why, like cutting corners with your face and your head, where if you get a bad hair transplant, you can't shave your head because you've got all these scars, and you can't grow your hair because you've got, you're kind of stuck in this weird limbo state. And I think there's no price to pay to risk that.
It's what you're talking about tells me, like, if I didn't know you and you told me this perception of Turkey and people going to Turkey, I would immediately know that you've been looking at this for quite a while. And here's why. Years ago, when people first started going to Turkey, it was for one reason and one reason only. It was cheap as hell. And they were marketing themselves to the lowest on the rung of educated patients that were just looking out for some sort of answer. and they were presenting themselves with lots of marketing saying, we're the answer, and we cost, a fifth of what it will cost you
They
in
pay for your
London, or
hotel. They get you this.
yeah, the whole nine
Same
yards. I mean,
day, in and out,
they
everything.
pull people in on this promise, and the treatment on the luxury scale, right? Red carpet treatment. When all you can afford is 2,000 euros or 1,500 bucks or whatever they're charging, and you get the option of feeling like royalty because you're getting picked up at the airport in a limousine, you're being given the red carpet treatment. You got, these people in this clinic, when you walk in the front door, they're just showering you with attention and professionalism and really making you feel like you're a VIP. And that's the way they market themselves. Like, you are a VIP. How can you not fall for that?
It's
Like,
all the
how can you not be
noise
attracted
except
by
for
that?
what's important. It's like everything is noise.
100%.
It's the experience. It's this and that. At the end of the day, all you care about is if they're gonna fix those follicles and position them
Right.
nicely and professionally, and have your best interest in mind. Because the most ethical doctors will actually act in your own best interest and tell you, hey, I'm happy to take your money, but you might not necessarily be a good candidate. And
Well,
it's
the challenge with this, what I was explaining was the way they started. The Turkish hair transplant clinics. It actually started where they were. I remember this very clearly. My first exposure to Turkish hair transplant clinics was all-inclusive medical tourism, where you would actually go on. The very first clinic I saw advertising a hair transplant cruise, where you go to Turkey.
What? What did you just say?
A cruise.
Did I hear you correctly?
Yes. So you go to Istanbul and you get a hair transplant.
That's messed up, Joe.
And then they put you on a cruise, and you go through the Bosphorus into the Black Sea, and on this cruise are a bunch of Eastern European women. And you just hang out for a few days on this cruise on the Black Sea with these Eastern European women, and your head is bandaged up like you look like an idiot. And I remember seeing pictures of these guys that, a lot of them were from the UK and different areas of Western Europe, and they're at a party on this cruise, this and these young women, Eastern European, Romanian, Ukrainian, whatever. And these guys, they had their drinks, and they're, the group picture, and they're all happy. And it's like, what am I seeing? And that was my first exposure to this. This was in 2008, I think, 2009. But you fast forward, okay? So through 2010
Joe,
onward into 2015.
What's even crazier is not even the fact that they're marketing. It's that there are so many people who will go under the knife with so little due diligence. They'll have someone reach out to them, or just contact one or two people, and they'll make like a life-changing decision on a whim. It blows my mind.
Of course, but here's the thing. So here's the evolution of the Turkish hair transplant market. For the first decade that it was really a thing, where people were taking notice and they were talking about it being so much cheaper, it transformed into something else. It's transformed into not the cheap place to get a hair transplant. If you're going to Turkey, you're going to the number one place to get a hair transplant. And it's morphed into that because today, when you look online for hair transplant options, everything is Turkey. They have so much money funneled into Google ads and these ads that follow you throughout different websites that you go to, and people talking about how everyone goes to Turkey because it's so good. It's not because it's so cheap. The cheapness is a secondary factor now. The number one reason why people go to Turkey is because they think that everyone goes to Turkey because it's the best place to go, because they have the best doctors, they got the best facilities, they got the best service, they got the best everything. So it is morphed on its own, simply due to the sheer numbers of people that go. So
Right.
now you have actual billionaires. Millionaires, yes, but billionaires with a B that do fly to Turkey for a $3,000 hair transplant, not because it's cheap, not because, they're misers with their money and, they just want the best deal, because they honestly believe it is the best place to go. So that's where we are now in the market. And so the people that are not in Turkey or in, these countries where it's so cheap, they're now not only looked at as being more expensive by far, they're also looked at as being inferior with quality. That's where we are today in 2024. You never thought you'd see that.
Crazy, all crazy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Joe, I know I don't want to take up too much of your time here, but I want to ask you just one more question here.
I'm good.
If a young person in their 20s starting to lose their hair, quick and actionable, what advice would you give them?
Medication first. By far, like, don't even take multiple medications. Don't take finasteride and minoxidil.
Want to isolate what works, right?
Isolate what works, because one of the biggest problems that people have when they, back to the original thing I was saying, is like, they freak out and they want to throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at the problem just to make it stop and reverse. That's not what you need to do. First thing you need to do is take a knee. Just relax, look at the situation objectively, and start with finasteride. Talk to I'm not a doctor. Talk to your doctor about getting on finasteride. Oral finasteride first. Okay, that's a gold standard for a reason. And excuse me. And try that for a year. It seems like forever. But having a bad hair transplant and then continued loss because you don't know what that balance is that you need to achieve will seem like a lifetime, far longer. Every day you deal with that will make that 1 year of waiting on medication seem like a second.
Right.
I've been there. I know.
Fine.
Medication.
Finasteride 1.
Yeah, finasteride 1. And then while you're on finasteride, you can do your research about, what's going on with your hair and what to expect with finasteride. Always look at what you're doing as far as the medication intake that you're having. And then if you can arrest the loss and it seems stable and you've been evaluated by a qualified hair restoration surgeon, always look to IAHRS surgeons. You can look at my website, hairtransplantmentor.com. Have a proper assessment by a hair restoration specialist about your candidacy. Not just one. Go see 3 doctors. Go see 5 doctors. Go see 10 doctors. But don't stick with just one doctor. Obviously, do your research online about who's good, but don't narrow it down to 1 and then go have the consultation. Narrow it down to 10 and have your consultation. And if you can actually go visit that clinic, it's the best money you ever spent, because that really helps you to get a better handle on not just the doctor, but the staff and how they treat you when you get to that clinic, which is, it gives you a window into the overall operations of that clinic. And you can feel better about your decision, yay or nay, right?
Got it.
Move on to the next one. But never rush into surgery, ever. And certainly don't do it before you're 25, because again, you remember what your hair loss was like just a few years prior, and so you're more likely to rush into something. But you also, your brain function hasn't fully developed yet for decision making, and the decision you make when you're 23, you may fully regret it 5 years later after everything is settled down and your decision making process is more mature. And yeah, I mean, that's the basics for starting out with this. Don't rush into it and look to medication to start off with.
Got it. Okay, I'm gonna ask you a few flash questions. So maybe worth looking into, not worth looking into, garbage, scam, just like quick questions. So finasteride.
Yes, look into it.
Yes. Minoxidil.
Yes, look into it.
Microneedling.
No, forget it.
Microneedling, by the way, for those, is just making tiny little incisions in the scalp, and that is supposed to kind of get growth factors going on. I'm surprised because you and Spencer definitely don't seem to be pro that.
I'm not completely against it, because there are situations where it can be beneficial, or supposedly so. Like, say if you're doing some sort of regenerative medicine treatment where it's superficial, like PRP or exosomes, some doctors will recommend microneedling for wounding to help to get those growth factors going to augment the treatment that you had. So it kind of kicks things in as a kick in the pants, so to speak.
Got it. Saw palmetto.
No, don't waste your time.
Low light laser therapy.
Look into it, but don't spend $3,000 or even $600 for a helmet. You can go to Amazon and get one for like $100, and it's the same thing.
Platelet-rich plasma, PRP.
It can be good, but it's just like with surgery, they're not the same from one clinic to the next. You actually do have to research clinics that have a proven track record with that, because the approach to PRP will vary widely from one clinic to the next, and it's almost
It's not standardized.
not worth.
There are no right.
No, there's absolutely no standardization to that whatsoever. So it can be good. You just got to really be careful with it.
Ketoconazole, Nizoral shampoo, antifungal.
Nah, no, it's great for dandruff, but I mean, it doesn't really do anything for hair. Even though there are 2 Japanese studies that did show it was effective as minoxidil, but only 2% topical, which is really not saying much. So it's really not worth looking into.
Oral finasteride.
Of course, yeah, that's the gold standard. Number one.
Sorry, I apologize. Topical finasteride.
It's a great alternative for people that are worried about side effects of oral finasteride. The problem with topical and a lot of the oral now, simply by definition of taking finasteride, it's generic. And I always recommend that if you're going to take oral, go with Proscar or Propecia because it's the original name brand. But then when you look at topicals, all of it is generic. So then you have to look at the manufacturer or the company that's creating this topical. Where are they getting their base components? Where are they getting their actual finasteride from? Is it some generic from China, or is it sourced from a reliable, consistent resource in North America or Israel or wherever? Because that matters. You need to have consistency with the product, and I mean that's a different discussion. But to answer your question directly, topical can be fantastic. I've seen really good results that rival oral finasteride, but again, the consistency issue, the source of your topical, that does matter.
Biotin.
No, waste of time. It makes your hair grow faster, but not more of it. The hair that you see now, you start taking biotin, it will increase its rate of growth.
And then oral minoxidil.
Yeah, it's there's some doctors that swear by it. That I was just talking to a doctor in South Africa yesterday, a friend of mine. He is saying that that's all he prescribes, and every one of his patients for the past 5 years that he's been prescribing it are seeing improvements across the board. It's really good stuff. But again, I'm not a doctor. You do need to consult with your doctor on any of these prescription medications because it may not be for you. So
right. I know this is just very general question, but I love this because it at least puts thoughts in people's heads.
Yeah.
One last question: diet.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think diet can play a role with hair loss? Very hard. I know it's an oversimplification here, but
yeah, being in Vancouver, we have the East Hastings area of Vancouver where no one down there has a proper diet. They have no proper nutrition. But if you find yourself in that area, you see all these people with full heads of hair. So, there is a strong argument. There's a strong argument to say that nutrition doesn't really matter.
That's so funny you say that. I was on Hastings many times too. It was just
so you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So I think that I don't want to say that it doesn't play a role because different people have a different tolerance to good and bad nutrition. And my own personal anecdote is when I first started to cut sugar out of my diet, and got into strength training and really, focusing on what I was eating, because overall health is, 85% nutrition, 15% exercise. You can play with those numbers, but the vast majority of your overall, physique and physical performance is due to your nutrition, not your exercise. And so, in my own personal experience, when I cut out sugars, when I cut out carbs, when I was doing high protein meats, and I was doing a lot of green vegetables, green leafy vegetables, the caveman diet before it was the caveman diet, I noticed that my hair, and again, everything on top of my head's transplanted. Excuse me. But I was noticing my hair on top and on the sides and back, which is not transplanted, seemed fuller. It seemed fuller, and I can't say that it grew. Any hair came back. I would never say that, but I did notice. Actually, some people even pointed out that they thought my hair looked healthier, and they're asking me what I've done to it. So there is a component that I think varies from person to person, but I can't say that it has a massive influence on hair loss, pro or con.
Very
Final answer.
beautiful. I love that. Okay, so I guess, slow and steady wins the race with getting on